everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Coffee Break Podcast. I'm exceptionally excited for our chat today because I get to talk to Todd Angelucci, who is just someone who's become a new friend of mine, just doing some extraordinary work in the male wellness space. So, Todd, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you for having me, Renee. Thank you.
Well, really excited for our conversation because it's going to be a little different than our normal conversation. And I cannot wait to unpack this whole male wellness. But I want to tell you a few more things about Todd. So he is a passionate advocate for men in nursing. Yeehaw. I always say we need more men in nursing. He's a leader in transformational leadership, mentorship, and he has this journey that he's been on, as I think many of us have been on a journey in nursing, from being an Army medic to a critical care nurse, corporate healthcare leader, and now a mentor. But this whole transformation started with really an unfortunate event. I don't know if I could call it an unfortunate event, but Todd, why don't you tell us how this transformation occurred?
It was a gut punch for sure. You know, I've done a lot of different things in nursing, and I was actually co-running a business in kind of geriatric care management. And I was with a client, and all of a sudden, you know, and it was on the tail of COVID. So it just kind of, it was in the COVID year, actually. So we had COVID in March, and all of a sudden I have this vision issue that I'm sitting there talking and it's blurry, and I'm like, what is this? And I'm like, maybe it's the mask, maybe I'm dehydrated, you know, kind of dusted off stuff. And honestly, it took like 5 minutes and it resolved, and I was like, oh, phew, and I dodged a bullet with that. And then my girlfriend's a nurse, so she's like, you know, call the doctor, because we're so busy all the time, right? You're like, all right, you know, maybe it was just a fluke, but I wound up calling the doctor. He wound up, you know, the MA called me back and said he wants to see it. And of course, you're busy. Can you come tomorrow? And I'm like, all right. Call the eye doctor. And I was really into mixed martial arts stuff, so I was training for an event that was going to occur. And I have a friend who's a chiropractor, and I said, you know, I need to get tuned up. So I told him the story. And he's like, why didn't you go to the ER? You know? And I was like, I don't know. But my doctor saw me the next day, and he's like, you know, we have to do this workup. You know, I'm 48 years old. I had a lot of male friends that were, you know, mountain bikers doing a lot of stuff. They've had strokes. And so a friend of mine came to my mind. I said, I should probably do something about this. And he says, if anything weird happens, just go to the ER. And I happened to go for a run the next day. I come back, I was getting ready for a meeting, and my hand felt really weird. It felt like I had a harder time communicating with it. And so I called my girl, and I said, I'm going to go to this small hospital down the street, like, you know, figuring they're saying I work too hard or something, right? And I get in there, and it's a zoo because it's COVID time, and they do the stroke workup. They put me in the MRI tube, and I'll never forget. They go, oh, the neurologist wants to add contrast. And I said, well, that can't be a good thing, right? So I get back into the ER bay. I actually had a room, which I was pleased about. And so then the doctor and the nurse come in, and it was very interesting. And they sat down. The doctor sits down. She goes, you know, Todd, you're not going crazy. You got a marble-sized tumor in your head. And I was like, what? Exactly. I was like, what? I'll never forget it. I stood up, I kind of looked up, and like a little tear ran down. And I go, this sucks. And I turned to them, and they're sitting there looking at me, and I was them thousands of times. Thousands. And they said to me, I'm so sorry.
Oh.
And I just felt like I was like dead.
Yep.
Like, honestly, and nothing to them. I was them 100,000 times, right? Like, I'm so sorry. And so that changed how I use that word for sure. And I'll share that a little bit if you're open, but it was game on. It was so game on. Like, I had a neurologist come to see me. He was a neurosurgeon. He was like going on his weekend vacation. They admitted me. Of course, I'm not on a lick of meds, and we're in COVID. My girlfriend's freaking out. I call my ex-wife, who's a nurse practitioner. She's like, oh my God, like, this is serious, right? And so there's a brain guy. I go, you have a brain guy in this small hospital? I said, like, so make a long story short, he was in the OR. He saw me the next day. They kept me MPO thinking they were going to drill something in my head to take a biopsy. But I have enough friends in the healthcare space and doctors, and they're like, why would you do that if it's, you don't know? So he comes in the next day, super guy, can't tell what it is. He goes, I don't know what this is. I can present it to the tumor board. It's the proverbial brain tumor that everyone always freaks out about, right? So I said, I'm going to get a second opinion at the big hospital up here in Connecticut. And he goes, can I make a recommendation? And I said, sure. So I called him from the bed, and I called his office. They saw me on Monday, and I went there, and I was like, I went 4 times. I said, this is hard, with an expletive for sure. Mm-hmm. And he's such a great guy. He goes, Todd, this is hard.
Yeah.
He goes, but I don't know what it is. He's the only one that picked up the neural deficit I had. It was deep in the motor pathway in my right frontal. And he goes, but it's got to come out. So I said, game on. COVID, nasal swabs and car lines, all that. And they did a workup at the other hospital because usually, brain tumors are secondary from other stuff. So I went through that route, and it was a total gut punch, but it was a gift. Now that I look at it, it taught me a lot.
So I want to talk a little bit about the experience leading up to, okay, now you're diagnosed and you're going to have surgery, and then what was the transformation? But before we started recording, Todd and I were talking. So I'm an old neurosurgical nurse. So I cared for patients, strokes, brain tumors, and head traumas. And I didn't know this until you shared this. I always would ask patients after, we'd always get them post-op. So they come to us post-op. What was your first indication? And you're right. Sometimes, sometimes it was just an incidental finding. They were in a car accident. Let's do a CT scan. Boom, something shows in the brain. It's Mets, usually from the lungs. So we could always tell, oh, nope, that looks like Mets from somewhere, usually the lungs. But we cared for a lot of patients with the pituitary tumors. And it was the change in their vision, blurred vision, double vision. So when somebody tells me they've had vision issues, I'm like, my first thought is brain tumor. Like, you can't help but think brain tumor. Now, it could be an ocular migraine, and I know people have had that, but I'm telling you, or a seizure. They had a seizure in a restaurant, and then they bring them in, and boom, they do a CT scan, and they find that they have a brain tumor. So I'm always hypersensitive when people are telling me, because as a nurse, a lot of people share their ailments with you. Anytime somebody says, all of a sudden I'm having this blurred vision, I'm like, brain tumor, go to the hospital, go get checked, because it can be an indication. So glad that you had some people encouraging you to go and get this checked out. But the vision and then the arm, like, yeah, something's not right here. But I could see how they were thinking, potential stroke, and then surprise, there's a little nugget in your brain. So walk us through then, like, you had the surgery, and then what was it that happened that made you become this incredible mentor that you are today?
Well, it was really interesting. It laid a groundwork for like the 2 weeks I kind of had to wait before, because like I'm here, I'm one of those people, like, let me deal with the worst case scenario and everything else is gravy.
Yeah.
And so the worst case is dying.
Mm-hmm.
So I sat with that and I explored that in my mind. And I just was very curious about the things that you think are important aren't that important. Mm-hmm. And I think it takes, and I've interviewed and, I've talked to a lot of survivors or people that even have cancer or whatever. And I'm very close to that space because I feel a connection to it.
Sure.
Is that the challenge is people can't actualize it until it's in their face. Like, everyone's like, well, I could get hit by a car tomorrow. I said, you could, but you're not thinking you're going to. No. And so I think what that did was like, oh my God, it taught me a lot about my life. And I realized that there was a lot of stuff that I'd done a lot of personal work in my life for sure. And I've, grown businesses. I've been, I worked in the nursing space. But the one thing that I learned about myself was that I was living my life like I had my foot on the gas and the brake at the same time. And it wasn't real, which is interesting, right? Like it's this perception. And so it unlocked the door for me to actualize how trauma showed up in my life. And I was like, wow, this is really interesting. And I just sat with that. And because I always invested in coaching in myself, I had some mentors that were, I had a coach, and it was a journey that people couldn't relate to and couldn't walk alongside me with unless there were other survivors. But the one thing was, when I was trying to grow a business, I connected with a process that looks at our thought habits and processes. So that was the piece that I learned to look at. And what it did was like how I wanted to show up in my life, and also the important part of looking at where we are. And there was things that I could control, and there was things I couldn't control.
Yeah.
And it's just powerful. And the biggest piece was I had to look at the wounds that showed up. And that was the piece that people often think is some process of it's not that hard to understand, but this trauma experience. And I listened to a podcast that really opened the door on it. And it was from a Navy SEAL who was shot like 27 times and he lived.
Oh my gosh.
And he is an interesting story, but his podcast story, the part that really hit me was that he was abused tremendously.
Wow.
As his father. And that level of trauma, and he turned it into a process where he could be of service. But it opened the door for me, because when I'm off, I'm on steroids, I'm doing a lot of inner work. I actually watched the Bible series on the History Channel, and I was just like, I'm like, after death experience, I dove into this, and then I just I connected to a power greater than myself I call God, and I was just like, what are you trying to teach me? And he taught me is like, are you being of service to people and others? Like, are you doing my will? And I was coaching people at the time, but I said I could do more. And that was the biggest thing that opened up. And then, I just started to utilize it in everything I did. And I used the framework, which I walk people through all the time. And it's a self-understanding. And the story, if you don't mind, can I share the story of when they said, I'm sorry?
Yeah.
And it relates to a nurse too, that really, it was a teaching moment. Was the one thing I try not to say is I'm sorry to people, especially when they're going through something really hard. I just say,
receive news that is not good.
Yeah, it's hard, and it's a default. We all do it, and I still mentally catch myself. But I've done this with people in hospice, and I say, or wherever I touch people, even people that aren't dying, I just say, this is hard. And you create this level of space of just joining them with it.
Yeah.
And then I said, but we could do some hard things.
So I want to unpack that a little bit, and I want to relate it back to leadership, because when I think about the people who are listening right now, most everybody, except for my family, okay, wait, I hope my family is listening to my podcast. I don't know. I'll have to double check, but it's leaders. It's healthcare leaders, physician leaders, nurse leaders, respiratory leaders. It's leaders. And when, especially the work that we do in addressing workplace bullying and incivility, trying to cultivate a healthier work culture. Oh my God, Todd, it's hard. I mean, it's one thing for me to work with a leader and say, do these things and say these words, but they're the ones that have to do it. But I don't know. Well, first of all, I've never said, I'm really sorry that your department is this dysfunctional. Okay, I'm really sorry that this employee of yours is this dysfunctional. I haven't said that. But I don't know that I've ever acknowledged this is hard. And I know it's hard. It's hard to have an honest conversation with someone, especially when there's this uncomfortableness of telling someone the truth, if that truth is not positive. And I so appreciate you, telling someone who was just diagnosed with maybe a potential life-threatening, disease, cancer, just to say, I know this is hard, but I'm going to stay in this space with you. And, I'm not equating this to like children, but that's a common phrase now, because I know my daughter says this to my granddaughter, Olivia, you can do hard things. This is hard. Yes, because she doesn't want to do her homework and she doesn't want, and my daughter Olivia will say, this is too hard. You can do hard things. And guess what? We can. When we have the support, and that's what I always try to tell the leaders we're working with, I'm going to have to start using that language. I know this is hard. You're not alone. We're here to help you and you can do hard things. Okay. And we're going to make it a little easier for you. And so how has this helped you? Because I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about wellness and the mentoring that you do, in particular with men, because, I'd love to see more men in nursing. And so can you tell us a little bit about your work in this area?
Yeah, I could definitely tell you. It's a very interesting story, and it's relatively new in the nursing space for me. In my journey, I have a coach, I believe in it. And he showed me a mirror of myself, and he's like, you might want to investigate and look into this masculinity. And he recommended a book that I read, and it was me. And every guy that I talked to, they're like, it was me. And so I said, wow, it's really interesting. And I started to explore this because I asked myself the question, and I ask a lot of guys this. I'm like, who do you spend time with? And they're often like their girlfriends, their spouse. Yep. They're at work, and they're raised by, women, usually a lot of fatherless families, the teaching systems, a lot of women. And I love women, beautiful, but it's, we're all have our uniqueness. And so I wound up joining his inner group and it was really interesting. And I learned a lot, and I was like, well, I could do this better in my mind. This is me, just whatever. And I created, and this has nothing to do with nursing, I created a men's mentorship private group, and I still have it to this day.
That's awesome.
And I watched these men grow and heal in ways that they never thought possible. And so what happened was, I jumped back into coaching nurses in general, and it wasn't because of choice. They just entered my sphere. I'm more of an energetic worker, and I noticed some themes in their habit thought process and the things that keep them stuck. And so I jumped back into the space. So like we were talking about before, I've been on LinkedIn forever, right? And then I did it for jobs or whatever, but all of a sudden I said, let me just explore here. So I said, let me search men groups, men in nursing. And so I came up with the American Association for Men in Nursing, which they're a great organization. They want to partner and do some stuff with me. And I started posting my content. I was writing a lot of different articles just on nursing and the problems and this inner shift that I could see happen, that I'm really a proponent of. And I started posting my content. It was crickets. I'm like, what's this? Like, there was nothing, and I'm like, and so I reached out. A lot of people were commenting on my articles, and there was a couple guys, and I said, is there a men in nursing group in here? And they're like, no. So a female nurse said, why don't you start one? I said, yeah, why not? And so literally I just, boom, actually a female helped me create the name. I've now changed it because it's now gravitated to service employees, healthcare workers, because we're all men. And what I've learned too is that the challenges that men face, they face in their life. And so to think that your life is just a compartment in your career, and then it compounds and it shows up in their work. And what happens is they really lost tapping into who they really are.
Mm-hmm.
And nurses inherently come from a codependent nature, and guys just kind of silently suffer, and they're not stepping in and honoring who they are and are learning more about themselves because they really don't know. And so it's just powerful. And so interesting story is we just started, I did a men's challenge on LinkedIn, and people signed up, and we got the group, and I got a real glimpse to see what a new group of men coming together were like. And it was so powerful to see. And the wounds that just start to show up as they start to talk. And we just, create space for that. And then they start to learn, and they feel like they could talk about the real things. And when men become more of who they are inherently, it allows the females in their lives to become more of who they are, because it's such a powerful place to be for both men and women. An interesting story is a lot of females reach out to me to work with me because they're struggling with the men in their life, but in reality, they're struggling with parts of themselves.
Well, I think you make a good point here. Even all the work that I do, and yes, I don't focus on female nurse leaders, okay? But if I had to say, who's my target audience? It's female nurse leaders, because that's the majority of them. Even, I attended and gave a keynote at AONL, and there are 5,500 people in the audience, and I'm telling you, 90% of them are women. And so a lot of the support, a lot of the mentorship, we tend to see that in healthcare really focused on women. However, why aren't we equally focusing on creating that space for men too? And maybe it doesn't have to be, okay, hey guys, we're going to have this separate thing for you, and, female leaders, you're over there, but really, bringing them together, I think would be so powerful and give them an opportunity to, as you've said, it's not to say I'm going to fillet myself open and share all of my wounds, but can you create an opportunity for even, men and women to come together and really share their vulnerability and talk about, especially in my world with leadership, it's not easy being a leader. It is hard work. And again, they're all probably struggling with very similar issues, but how can you create that space for them to share, to mentor each other? And as you said, it affects their personal lives too in a positive way. And so love, that you're listening to what people are asking for.
Yeah. And it's an interesting space because there's clearly differences, whether you want to acknowledge them or not. And the fact that when men can step into their authentic self, and I'm not talking about misogyny, it's talking about just their essence of being a man, because they have a playbook. They don't know a man playbook, because they have this perceived what a man should be like, but it's not the reality.
Yeah.
And so when they start to learn what reality is, then they step into more of who they are, which supports women in a way that is so powerful. I wrote an article about this, and the women were really like, yeah, because there's a vacuum that the women inherently absorb. And it causes you think this works in the work? It's in the home. It's in our kids, and more women have reached out to me, and we've had some really powerful conversations. And in the leadership space, can I share something about the We Do Hard Things that may be helpful?
Sure.
So I was doing something new in nursing, and I do some part-time work because I feel called to help patients that are, that because of my brain tumor. And I was learning something new, and it triggered some trauma stuff in me that I'm aware of. And I think nurses, when they could start acknowledging it, then that sideways behavior becomes less, you know what I mean? Because it shows up sideways. We all have been sideways for sure. And I had this preceptor, and I'll never forget it. She's a nurse. And I did a hospice thing, which I never did before. And this was a tough spot to be in. And she goes, I said, I'm noticing. And she goes, it's okay, Todd. We do hard things, and I'm here.
That was beautiful.
And
Hard things, and I'm here.
because I told her my we do hard things story. But I say that because people just need to know that you're there with them and stand alongside them, because the journey they don't know. And they have to have that experience themselves. But if you could create this space for them to do it, and I've seen it with leaders. I've had nurses recently call me just crying, literally crying. They took my assessment, they found me on LinkedIn, and I created space. And they're like, oh my God, my leader's doing this. I literally quit my job. And she just broke down and cried. And I was just like, it's okay. What's that about? And I created space for her. I said, what would it be like for you to learn a way to not let that hit you like that at your core, and create a place where it doesn't harm you, but you could start stepping into a place of being more of who you are. And she's like, and it shifted her totally.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've been bringing this issue up a lot over the last couple of months because there's something that happened with my company something happened that wasn't good, and I viewed it as a personal failure, okay? And I started thinking about this when leaders get bad metrics, instead of looking at it as, wow, these metrics are pretty bad, now I know what I need to work on. They view them as personal failures. Like, oh my gosh, my employee engagement scores are the lowest in the hospital. Personal failure. Instead of, I don't know, recognizing that, first of all, they're not responsible for everything, although we feel like we are. But I could see the value in being able to talk to someone about this who's going to give them time and space to do that without judging. And, you know, we do hard things and I'm here for you. Let's talk through it. And I keep talking about this recently because I'm noticing it. You know how you just start paying attention to the words people use, the reactions that you see from people. And this is such a big issue right now where we take things so personally, you know, from our work, and then it infects our personal lives too. And I could see the value in having a place for mentorship with other people that you can really just tell the truth and be yourself. I highly recommend pretty much every human on earth have someone, whether it's a coach, a therapist, a mastermind, a group. It's funny, I have a colleague of mine who has her own business, and we'll hop on a call Saturday mornings and just vent. We will just vent of the difficulty, the challenges of running your own company. It was easier being a nurse. It's easier being an executive. And then we get over it, but we love each other and we help each other and, you know, sort of recognize the common challenges that, yeah, as you said, Todd, we all face. We all have trauma. We all have wounds. And to be able to talk about them, I think, is really healthy, especially if we're looking at this whole wellness and how wellness is such a challenge right now for all of us.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting. One of the things that I've learned, and as I coached a lot of people, especially leaders, is they see these behaviors, and this is your wheelhouse for sure. And the work that I think is important when we're doing this, like walking alongside, it's honoring our own pain first. Mm-hmm. And when we can honor it in ourselves, because, you know, I talk to a bunch of leaders and I have some mentors, and they always say 90% of their business problems are personal problems in disguise. Mm-hmm. And so when we can honor this spot in ourselves, then we could see it in somebody else and ask better questions rather than reacting. Because I actually had a nurse professional that was like, oh my God, this person I work with. And we did some inner work. So we tapped into some of his pain so he could walk through it. And I said, just imagine what pain she has, and the shift in him, and just understanding her made a huge difference. So then he could come at a place of like honoring her, even though she might not be so nice, mm-hmm. and stepping into a space to ask questions to get her to open up, because maybe those wounds are just deep from home or somewhere that it's coming out sideways. And I think you're probably busier because COVID blew the doors off of trauma for people.
As they say, hurt people. And, you're bringing up some really valid points here. And we have the tendency to label, to demonize, certain people, certain roles. And I appreciate your approach. It's to get curious. It's to ask questions. It's to recognize that, well, there's a balance here. Okay. So I'm just going to tell you all, there's a balance. I always believe in giving people the benefit of the doubt, have an honest conversation with them, get curious. Is there something else going on? And, support them if they're willing to receive support. If you get to the point where their behaviors are so disruptive and they're either not capable or not willing, well, then that's a different conversation. We have a lot of empathy for, our fellow humans. And I know it's very difficult. I know when I was a manager, terminating someone, like I remember the first person I terminated, I could not stand up for 15 minutes. I was so weak in the knees. I never fired anyone, and it was the right thing to do, but it was so hard. So I get that. And, sometimes we have to make decisions that are painful for us, but it all goes back to just have a conversation with someone and find out if there's something going on and, help them if you can.
Yeah, I love it. You do some great work out there for sure.
Yeah. Thank you for that. It's important work. And, we have a lot more work to do. So as we start wrapping up, Todd, let's say there's someone listening, male, female, who this really resonates with them. Maybe they're recognizing that they have some wounds, some past traumas. And as you did, you allowed that trauma to transform you into now how you show up and how you show up for others as differently as you did before. What would you recommend that they do? What's the first step?
I think the first step is to really just start to look inward instead of outward. I think, we come from a place where it's easy to blame situations. And granted, there's tough situations, right? It's start to look inward, reach out to a mentor. I was never somebody that invested in coaching, but now it's a priority for me. And because I do it, and it allows that space to grow in ways that people don't understand.
Yeah.
And I think coaching the word gets a little played out. I've mentored. I like to mentor now and create a space where you could create other mentors, because that's what's going to shift yourself, and you get to heal alongside of people that you're helping, which is pretty cool if you're open to looking at it in a way. And there's people that aren't open to it, like you shared. There's people that are really that can't look at it, and that's okay too, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's that. It's usually an inward look, and it may take a long time for you to get there because you go kicking and screaming. Because it's all that. But yeah, that's kind of what I would say, and if anyone's curious about, learning more, they can reach out to me. It's my name.
Yeah, I would. So thank you for that. I think that's very wise advice. I have had a business coach I've had this company for almost 14 years. I probably had various business coaches, over the years as I've grown, for about the last 11. And you're so right. I'll hop on a call with David, my business coach, and he'll help me to see something from a completely different perspective that I didn't even realize. And it's so funny. I'll be on the call with him. I'll do that just blew my mind. Okay. And he's been so incredibly helpful. And I do appreciate the whole coach versus mentor, but it's first, going inward. Some people, the first step is some self-reflection, self-awareness. And then once you recognize that there are some things that you want to work on, then, oh my gosh, reach out to somebody for help. Yeah. Why do we have to do this alone? So there's a book that I read, I think it was Dan Sullivan and Benjamin Hardy. It's who, not how. So not how am I going to fix this? How am I going to work? It's who can help me. And I think that's the beauty of coaching and mentoring, is that answers the who. it's finding somebody who can help you. But it starts with, internal reflection. So Todd, if people want to reach out to you, because I'm sure there's some people who are listening who are like, I want to get involved in your group that you, now is this hosted online? Is this?
Yeah, I do it on Zoom, and for the guys, I create a private Zoom so they could open up, and so they could just reach out to me via LinkedIn or at my website, which is my name, 𝗃𝗃𝗄𝗃.com, if they're interested. And the ladies, it's interesting, a lot of blended stuff initially, because a lot of the women are interested in the coaching and mentoring that I'm doing, because they've noticed some shifts in some of the content that I write that's a little different. And so it's really an interesting place to be. And it's been really fun. And, my goal is to not talk about it, just to do it. I think in the nursing space, we're talking about what needs to be changed, but we just need to be that change, because the things that we're rooting for may not come for a while.
And I always think that all change starts with you. It's like the one person. So we will have Todd's LinkedIn profile, his link to his website in the show notes. And I'll also put the book, Who Not How. Although I can save you a few bucks. That's the book. Ask who can help, not how I can get this done or how I can make this better. Just find someone else who can help you with it. Okay. It's excellent. The whole concept is fascinating. So, and I highly also recommend coaching. As I said, I have a business coach, but I'm also working with like a functional medicine coach. And I've been doing this for the last 2 years, really helping me to be the very best as far as holistically, health that I can be as I'm, getting older, and learned so much, and, feel like I'm showing up as a better human being because of both of these coaches. And so highly recommend this. So Todd, thank you. Thank you for being a guest on our show today. I so appreciate all your good work.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here with you, Renee, for sure.
Well, I know we're going to stay connected, and, thank you again, Todd. And I just want to thank everybody else who is listening to this right now or watching the recording. I always say you have busy lives. I know you do, but you took time out today to either listen or watch this, which tells me something, that you're also looking to improve, to lead better, to become a better human. And so if you like this podcast, if you can please give us a review, rate this podcast, and share it with someone else who might need to hear this message today. Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Bye.